Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Sanders from the CICMQ programme. I'm joined by Sharon Adams and a cast of quite a few, as always. And today we're going to be running through on our 11th session best practice roadmaps and stakeholder management. So it's about how to build a roadmap, how to get buy-in to that roadmap, and also how you're going to then move forward in terms of stakeholder management and the sorts of hints and tips and tricks that we've seen with other organisations that we work with. And there's also some best practice. If you don't know where to start in terms of building a roadmap, we've got some examples, as well as what we call the strategy spider. And I've been using the strategy spider for some years now with various clients, and I hope that you'll find this session useful. As I said, this particular session is being recorded. It'll be put onto the CICM YouTube channel, as well as being offered as to CICMQ clients and others. It'll be offered as a separate session. So if you want to run this session for your teams, then please get in touch with us. Okay, everybody should be able to see that screen. If you can, put a thumbs up. Excellent, thank you. So best practice. Now, roadmaps and stakeholder management are one of the 6 criteria of the CICMQ program, and it's the 6th criteria. So it's the one at the very end. And all of the other stuff that we do when we're looking at CICMQ is quite a technical type stuff. So it's things like credit policy, compliance, dashboards, all of that kind of thing. But this is very much sort of a business type thing that we need to do. So all organisations, all teams, whether you are a shared service center, whether you're credit, whether you are a sales team, etc., you should be doing this stuff, especially now. And this is, as I say, we've got some examples in here from some organizations. At least one of you will recognize one of the things that we're going to be putting up here. But overall, it's about where are we now? And we notice that when we're in this current lockdown situation, it's going to be more difficult for us to engage with our business communities and the business generally. So what do we need to do to enable that and to facilitate that a little bit? I'm just going to turn off this machine here, otherwise it's going to be beeping and pinging at me for a while. There we go. Right. So so this is what we're going to look at. So first of all bets are off. We're going to look at hearts and minds. Are we invisible? The strategy spider, and don't stop. Right. So that's a very cryptic agenda for today. Planning for the recovery. As we've said, all bets are currently off. The plans that we had previously, before we started this whole this whole social experiment, have all been changed, and we've gone through a survival piece, which has put everything on hold. Most projects and things have stopped, although some organisations have used the lockdown in order to push forward some projects as well, including things like automation, which makes the organisations more resilient. There's more virtual training happening than we thought that there would be at the beginning of this process. And of course, as we've said many times before, when we started this whole thing, we never really knew how long it was going to last, what the phases were going to be, and so we've come into this with completely blind, really. And we're now in a situation where we've got to start thinking, right, we're beginning to come out of this process now. We've got people back in the office in some instances. What are we going to do? How are we going to make things different? So planning is good. We need to do planning, and as it says there, and one of my favourite comments that I've made many times, many of you have heard me, as Mike Tyson said, planning is fantastic, and everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So what we have to do is make sure that whatever plans we do have are flexible. And how do we now thrive in the recovery? How do we then change and make sure that we are in the driving seat, really, going forward in terms of what we're going to be doing in the future, and how are we going to drive our organisation, specifically our credit teams, going forward? As I said, it doesn't matter if you're in a credit team. It also this relates to every organisation that you've got, and the stuff that I've done in this presentation, I've done for teams, I've done for individuals, as well as companies. As well. So all of this is very relevant right now. We have a change in working, and with that change in working, we have to have a change of approach. The old ways of doing stakeholder management, building plans, managing people, recruiting people, all of those things have now changed. and we have to change that approach as well. So when we're looking at putting together stakeholder management plans and also roadmaps and things, we've got to think differently now than we did before. We can't just sort of rock up somewhere to a meeting, do a presentation, and say, "Yep, that's it, guys, off you go." So it's a very, very different approach, and we have to adopt different ways of working now, and it is becoming more and more complicated as some people are in the office and some are not. We have an opportunity here to create the plans ourselves and to drive that change. If we don't, as I've said many times before, others will do it for us. And as we know, our friends the accountants are never really there, never really known for making some fantastic decisions. A lot of decisions around this are based on cost, not quality, not customer service. So we need to think about how we can take control of this change. And by doing the things that I'm going to be talking about in this session, we'll build a degree of trust with you and also your stakeholders. So hopefully you will take something away from this session. The new world. So stuff has changed. The new world. What are the vision and values? Are the vision and values the same as they were in your organization prior to this whole social experiment that we've been working on? If they are the same, then that's fine, but they are likely to have changed. There's likely to be a new strategy, even though that strategy is short term. So we need to think that through going forward. Is it the same as it was before? Do we need to change tack? Have we thought through what our plan is pre-lockdown to what is it now? And what is this next 6 months going to bring? Again, we don't really know. What we do know is we're likely to see local lockdowns. We're likely to see some industries changing and flexing as restrictions come in and get released. I understand that on the news this morning, universities, etc., are going back, which is great news, I guess, for those that are going to university. But they are also going to be coming home. And when they come home, will they be bringing some of the infections with them? So that could change the dynamics again. So it's a very, 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 very flexible situation at the moment. Are we going to have more of the same that we've been suffering over the last 2 or 3 months, or is it going to be different? Everything is much, much more short term than it was this time last year. This time last year, many organisations were thinking of the 3-year plan, the 5-year plan. 2 or 3 of my clients that I was working with were looking at a 3 or 5-year plan, and of course, a bus was driven through that in March this year. So and it switched very quickly. So when you're looking at your stakeholder plan, it is not just about, well, what is it going to be? What are we going to be planning to do? We should try and break it down as much as possible. 30, 60, 90 days. And what is the plan for the next year? We can't really do a hell of a lot more than that right now because we don't really know where we're going to be. And how will you ensure also in this new world that we're now living in, how will you ensure that what you develop is going to be delivered into the hearts and minds of the organization? How do you do that now? You can't sort of get everybody in a room and really whoop them up into a frenzy anymore. This is a very, very different approach. So how are you going to do that? And from 1 year from today, how is your plan going to look? Is it something that people are going to remember? Is it going to be hearts and minds? Or, like many organizations, will it just be wallpaper? Because many organizations, their visions and values are just wallpaper. I've been to so many organizations where I've done workshops and stuff like that, where I'm talking to a team of 30 odd people and they're all in the room, and I ask them what their vision and values are, and they have absolutely no clue, despite the fact there's a poster on the back wall which tells them what they are. They just don't look at these things. It's wallpaper, they walk past it. And this is very, very true of most organizations. When I talk to organizations and I ask them that question, is your vision and value hearts and minds? Do people live and breathe it? Or is it just wallpaper? And only 20% of the people that I speak to say that it's actually hearts and minds. But it's the sort of thing that bosses like to do. They like to have this is our vision, this is great, it's customer service, it's revenue, it's teamwork, it's we take notice of our people and all of this kind of stuff. But a lot of it is just wallpaper. And when push comes to shove, people do tend to sort of revert back to, well, it's revenue and it's cost, right? And the other stuff just goes out the window. And we know that most organizations, when they're struggling, training and development does tend to take a back step. So of course, every vision and value statement has got people in there somewhere. And of course, when times get tough, elements of the vision and value statement start to disappear. So will it be hearts and minds, or is it just going to be wallpaper? And the objective here is to try and make it hearts and minds, but the only people that can do that will be you. So making something hearts and minds, you've got to get everybody on board. But right now, we're all working from home, or we're in disparate places, and we are becoming invisible if we're not careful. And if we are becoming invisible, making that difference in terms of getting it into hearts and minds is going to be significantly more difficult. So staying in touch and motivated is going to be a critical thing going forward. Pam has just arrived. Fantastic. I'm just going to admit it. So making the staying in touch and motivated is going to be very, very difficult. We've seen organisations do various things, including online huddles and using afternoon sessions, etc. And I've noticed that the Midland Shared Service Forum, they've got a Where Are You Now thing happening on the 7th of October, which is happening at 5:30 till 6:30, and it's just that, right, just take your background off and let's talk about where you are. Right, little things like that are kind of helping people and organizations think, well, how do we stay in touch? How do we stay motivated? And there are new ways of working. When we look at high performing teams, the 3 elements of high performing team: people, stakeholders, and common cause, or the roadmap, you know, the plan. All of those things now have changed. We're managing people differently than we ever have before. We have to manage our stakeholders differently than we ever have before. And our plan, etc., getting that articulated in a structured way is going to be much, much more difficult. So we have to try and remain visible all the time. Now, one of the things that we've said and the strategies that we've said is, if you are going to the office, don't sit on your email. Don't go to a hot desk and sit there all day. Get up and walk about. Find out when people are coming into the office, and find out when you can meet with them, because the times of bumping into people in the corridor are definitely gone right now. Mainly because you're on some sort of a one-way system and everybody's walking in the same direction. So one team adding value. So getting your external stakeholders involved is the most important thing. Articulating your Thrive objectives now, and you have to do that to your peers, and also the whole stakeholder community. When we think about who are our stakeholders, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on, who are our stakeholders? They are pretty much everybody that we deal with. Credit sits in the middle of everything, and therefore our customers, our peers, our staff, the senior leadership of the business, their first reports, the sales teams, everybody is a member of our stakeholder community. And this is something that organizations tend to forget. So we have to think through, how are we going to get that? And each message to each of those communities will be slightly different. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I'm glad that Pam's joined. Hi, Pam.
Hi.
How did your training go? Good?
Very good, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. Great. I would expect nothing less. So when we're looking at gathering information, first of all, one of the important things is to ask for help. If you're looking at building plans and building stakeholder plans, ask for help. Go out there and talk to the people that are actually doing the work, i.e. your team members, as well as other stakeholders as well. What do the stakeholders want to get out of the discussions and things that you're having? So yes, it is a message that you're trying to get, but also in order to get them to listen to you, you need to understand and talk the sort of same languages that they do. And when you're looking at working with them to gain some of these new strategies, the other thing that we need to think about is speak to marketing. How are marketing currently communicating with the customers? Don't just sort of think, well, I always talk to customers anyway, I'll do it through the channels that we do when we're phoning them for money, etc. Don't do that. Also look at it from the marketing perspective and the business perspective. If your organization does do customer satisfaction surveys and stuff like that, do you have an element of that customer satisfaction survey that talks about billing and credit? If you don't, it should, because that is one of the key contacts with an organization. Billing and credit tends to speak to customers significantly more than anybody else in the organization. So your message to them is going to be extremely important. If you're communicating, if your bills are rubbish, then you need to think about, well, how are we going to change the format of our bills? And this is something that you should always think about. Billing might not be your responsibility, but of course, all the debt that results in poor billing ends up on your ledger. So you do have a responsibility for it. So speak with marketing as to how you can develop and work with them to get your message out to the customer base, not just through the normal channels. Right. So the what in a roadmap. Okay. So when you're looking at a roadmap or a plan or a common purpose, as I like to call it, something that everybody can get behind, you need to link that roadmap in some way to your vision and values. So each element, and we've got some examples of this and we can show it to you. Each element of your plan should link in some way to one of the vision and values. So if you've got 5 visions and values, most organizations have 5, right? And it's something around people, customer service, revenue, teamwork, et cetera, et cetera. They're all pretty much the same. Be innovative and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, they're not very imaginative, these things. They're all pretty much the same. So you can pick these up. But what you should do is look at those visions and values, and how can you shoehorn your actions into each one of those visions and values. And the reason why we say that is because your senior managers, senior leaders, are the people that would have developed that vision and values, or they spent a bucket load of money with consultants that help them do that, right, over a 5-day workshop where, you know, hundreds of chicken legs were eaten in buffets, and they're probably to no avail because nobody takes any notice of the vision anyway. So if you're looking at it, the best way to get your organization or your senior leaders to agree and buy into your vision and values and your roadmap is to link everything to the vision. Right? That way, they can't really argue with it. You know, this is going to build teamwork. This is going to improve service. This is going to drive innovation. This is going to be continuous improvement. This is going to be revenue and cash. Right? All of these things, if you can link your actions to these things, then that will drive and create more buy-in. Whatever you're putting in, of course, you've got all of your other stakeholders too. So the stakeholders include your teams. So whatever you put in your roadmap must be relatable and must be relevant to the people in your team. They can't, you know, you can't start talking about, oh yes, we need to improve net working capital, and to a credit manager and to a credit person, that means absolutely nothing. Yes, we've got to increase margin and revenue. That means nothing, right? What does it mean? It means, yeah, we're going to get more cash. I get that. Yeah. So be a lot more simplify it and make sure that you've got it relevant to the people that you're aiming at, the conversations that you're having, and relatable, so that it's something that they can understand how they're going to make a difference. So involve the team in the development of this. Don't just sort of suddenly present them out. That's what we're going to do. And I've seen lots of organizations that have actually developed plans, and the people have had no part in them whatsoever. And a great example was I was with a law firm. It wasn't DWF, in case you're wondering, but I was working in a law firm, and what they did with their new strategy and vision as an organization was, one day everybody turned up for work and there was a new screensaver. That was it. There was no other communication. It was just a posh screensaver with a diamond on it, I think it was, with points around the diamond as to what they wanted to do. There was no other communication at all. And when I asked the team members, so what's this mean then? They just looked at me and said, don't know, it just turned up about a week ago. We have no idea what it is. And that's an example of wallpaper. Yeah. So if you're going to put something in place, you need to make sure that you involve your team in it so they understand what you're trying to do, and also involve them in the development and the delivery of it. So, and include elements of that in your team's objectives. Don't just sort of assume that, oh, it'll happen, right? So if there are certain elements that are in people's objectives, you've got to make sure that they understand what they are. But as I said earlier, don't make it complicated. Keep it as simple as possible. When we do our cash challenge, for example, which is a common purpose, yeah. When we do our cash challenge, we have one target, and that's it. We keep it as simple, and we make sure that everybody can understand it. That target is always cash. Everybody knows what it is, and everybody knows how they can influence it. And if they don't know how to influence it, explain to them how they can. So don't make it complicated. Keep it very simple, and display. Make some sort of a display in your team or on your systems that actually you can actually see it. You know, and we've got a great example of a display that we'll show you in a little while as well. So where do you start? So you've got all this stuff going on in your department, all of these actions and things, and you just don't really know where to start. Do we look at billing first, or do we think of the frequency of billing? Do we look at our credit assessment stuff? Where do we start? So what I did was, for a client a while back, I put together this. This is what I call the strategy spider, right? And it essentially covers pretty much everything in your organization potentially. So it looks at targets, measures, cycle times, print production times on billing, things like that, disputes, accuracy, timeliness, KPIs, all sorts of things that you can possibly imagine, costs, Costs of rework. Do you have costs of rework? Do you know how much disputes costing you? A cost per bill. Yeah. Toolkits, risk assessments, post-implementation, pre-implementation toolkits for new customers. Thinking about policy and code of practice, external customer communications. How do you communicate your credit policy to your customers? Yeah. Internal rules and guidelines. How do you communicate your credit policy and rules to your team, so your organization generally? Looking at process management. Where do you keep this stuff? What documentation do you have? How do you manage that? Yeah. Invoice and options and formats, cost and risk and benefit of the different types of invoicing that you do. So, is it better to have some customers on monthly billing, quarterly billing, self-billing, email, online, paper? What do they want? How are you going to do it? And all of these things are the sorts of stuff that you can look at as part of the building of your strategy. Location, yeah, and this is also something which may not be totally in your gift, but looking at the location of credit activities and how it's worked, roles and responsibilities in the organisation, the governance of the organisation, etc., etc. This is just a snapshot of some of the things you might want to think about, and it's a way you can just sort of say, right, this is like a bit of an aid memoir. Which bits do I need to look at in terms of targets and improvement and training and people, etc., etc. So this is something that you might want to think about. The big piece that's missing out of this particular one, this is more about process and systems and stuff, is of course people. What is going to be your people strategy? And there's a people strategy thing that was put together by an organisation called Associated British Agriculture, which is a chap called Frank Anderson. He does some really good stuff in the CICMQ community, but he's got a people policy, which is something that he has, and it sets out not only what he's going to do for the people, but also what the expectation the company has of the people that work in his team. So it's a two-way street, and it's a very, very interesting. If anybody wants to have a copy of the Frank's people policy, just drop me a line, CICMQ@cicm.com. I will get something to you. So that's the strategy spider. So that's a bit of a sort of an aid memoir as to what you might want to think. I'll hand over to Pam at this point because she sent me some examples, and I thought this was a particularly good one. So this is all about the CICMQ criteria. Pam, do you want to sort of quickly run through this one?
Yeah. So this one of our clients that has gone through CICMQ accreditation gave me a similar thing to this, and I thought, I really like this, and we now send it out as an example because a lot of companies don't know where to start or what it should look like. But this is nice and simple. The CICMQ criteria starts off with credit policy, compliance, customer service, personal professional development, performance measures, KPIs, stakeholders, and roadmap. So those are our 6 criteria. And then what they've done with that is they've put the quarters in, as in the reporting quarter. So it doesn't necessarily have to be dates, but it's just the quarter. And then for each of those areas, what needs to be done. So credit policy, you're not changing your credit policy every day, but you certainly should be doing updates. And we talked a lot about this right at the beginning of lockdown, and saying, should you be revising anything in your credit policy, for example? So that would have been a focus to do that. The same with compliance. You don't change everything every day of the week, but certainly it should be being reviewed, and so on and so forth. The personal and professional development, if you look at that part of it, I mean, I know that the writing's very small because it is just there to give an indication, but it includes things like reviewing the roles and responsibilities, looking at appraisals, looking at qualifications. So getting your people involved in CICM, whether it's by study or by membership or whatever. So we always really sort of push that home as being a good example. The same with performance measurement, KPIs. Lots of project work always goes on around this because it's quite key to your company's, obviously the 5-year plans, etc. So that section you can see is a little bit bigger than the others, and this is where you'd have any projects in there about implementing new systems, changes in KPIs, etc. And then the stakeholders and the roadmap, what you're going to do with them. And of course, beyond is updating your roadmap. So really nice and visual, very simple, and that would appear, the client that used that type of thing had that on everybody's desktop as one of the parts that they opened. Okay, so the next example, this one was all to do with the company values. So across the top in blue, you can see the time frame. So again, very simple. And then the company values were passionate about people, inquisitive, expert, and ambitious. So then everything in that roadmap aligned to the company's visions, etc. And it just made sure that there was the focus. And what we recognize straight away with this is that when you're trying to get buy-in from your sort of top management about doing CICMQ or taking an interest in what's going on, if you're aligning it to your company values, you're right on the money there straight away. So again, we liked that. And as I said, it's lovely and simple, very colourful, very nice, and something that can be displayed in the office if necessary. So those were our sort of two.
Yeah, those are two. This one here is quite an old one now. Pam will recognise this one. This was the credit management journey that was created by Shell International. I can use this because it was subject. It was in the 2008 ICM conference that happened at the Excel Centre, and it was the last CICM conference that they had. But this was from the period from 2006 to 2008. So it's a little bit old now. Mm. However, just to sort of give you an indication where they started from, they recognized where they started from, which was this fragmented credit management. They had 17 different reporting lines for credit as an indicator. Right? This was 140 countries or something like that. They had credit all over the place. They had lots and lots of different policies and procedures, lots of different systems. So that's where they started from. Where they wanted to be was this green light at the top there, a professional customer-focused credit management team. But they recognized it was going to take them a while. Right? So this was originally created by myself, Joris Kniep, who was at the time the head of Shell Credit, and a chap called Michael Knoll, who was their finance director. And there were three of us late night, burning the midnight oil, literally doing this. Michael was in Germany. We were on a whiteboard in the UK, and we pulled this together. Now, if you look at this is quite interesting because you look at some of the comments and stuff in here. This is pre-CICMQ. Right? But if you look at that, they're very, very similar to the 6 criteria. Things like single set of rules, compliance, things like professionalism, which is personal professional development, systems and process standardization, consistent management information, organizational alignment. So it's all very, very similar. Operational industries, credit strategies, customer service, etc. So this is like, if you like, the DNA of where the CICMQ program came from. And it took 2 years to get there, but underneath each block, and as Pam said, when we look at this one, it's nice and simple. That's the headline one that you put on the wall, that you do your presentations to, etc. You then have underneath each one of those lines, each one set of rules or process. There was another box. There was a whole list of things that were going on that would actually deliver that particular element of the strategy. Right? So underneath each one, so professionalism included membership of the Institute, professional training and development, and it included that's for all across the world. In fact, this is what a lot of Pam spent these 2 years doing, was training all of their new credit controllers from all the various things in the shared service centers, all coming together to create this single credit management function. As I said, it took 2 years to get there for this particular plan. And I worked with them and traveled around helping them to deliver this. And one of the biggest problems that we had, of course, was the process and system standardization. It took us a year just to get the definitions of what we were going to be measuring done. Right? And there was a Dutch guy that did that, but it took a year just to do that because everybody was measuring their own DSO and differently, right? Depending on which division, country, etc. you were in. So it took a long time. Once this was delivered, it then got another block added onto the top of it. So it just carried on. And fundamentally, Pam has literally just finished the midterm review for Shell. They still do this. They still do this. They still have a plan. They still have a roadmap. The downstream credit manual, which was originally created back in 2006, is still there. Yeah, it's now on. Is it version 33?
Yeah, 34. I think they were going to.
Yeah. So they've still got it. So it demonstrates that when you've got something that works, that you carry on using it, and they continue and still use this. So those are 3 examples of roadmaps and the way that you can show it. But all, you know, there's lots and lots of different examples that we've got. But these are 3 of the nice, simple, easy ones. And of course, you can then click on something and it takes you to the detail underneath. So you've got your roadmap. You know what you're going to do. That's the first step. All right, you can't talk to anybody about anything yet because you haven't got one. You've got to get this in place first and decide how you're going to put it together, what it's going to look like, and how you can present it to the leadership. Once you've got that, you then need to think, right, how am I going to articulate this to my audience, right? And this is when it can start to get somewhat difficult. So, as I said earlier, who are your stakeholders? Everyone is the answer to that question. If you look at that, we've got an example later on of an organization, but everyone is pretty much the stakeholder in your organization. So you need to figure out what message are you going to send each of your different stakeholders, because they all are interested in different things. It's about finding what button you need to press to get their attention. Okay, so so the message is, what do you want to send them? How do you want to articulate it? When do you want to send it, and how often? The thing is, once you start this stuff, you can't stop. You've got to carry on. You can't just say, all right, we've done that now. That's great. Okay, we've done it. That's it, right? Very, very quickly, it will become wallpaper. You've got to keep it up to date. You've got to keep communicating it. There's no point just telling people that this is what you're doing once. You've got to carry on doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it without stopping. How do you get the stakeholders' attention? One of my favorite ways, and it's worked in every organization that I've worked in, are league tables. And for those of you that know me, you will know I bang on about league tables regularly, because nobody likes to be at the bottom of a league table. And salespeople, regions, branches, products, business units, functions, you can create a league table based on the output of these functions and how it impacts you, right? So it could be related to DSO, disputes, errors, service level agreements, you know, which salesman makes the most errors on the account application form, right? You can say who it is. Which region has got the worst debtors position, the worst DSO, the worst number of disputes, and errors. You can put that in terms of the percentage of the revenue or the actual pound value of what they're doing. It doesn't matter. But what you've got to do is think about, you've got to get them into some sort of a league table in order to get their attention. So putting them in a league table is absolutely the thing to do. It changes behavior and it makes people think about how they can work with you to resolve the issues that you have. And this should be part of your roadmap, developing league tables and driving down. This sits in working together in the business. If you've got these sorts of vision statements, it also sits in continuous improvement. It sits in being part of the business. It sits in all sorts of different things. So you can shoehorn league tables into pretty much everything. If you know, customer service, you can put it in there as well. So think about how is your organization structured? Is it by function? Is it by region? Is it by branches? What is it? If you can break that down, you can then create league tables for this. Red, amber, green. Now, the obvious thing is, don't go straight in with the whole league table thing immediately. That I would call is the nuclear option, right? You will get in all sorts of trouble for that. The best thing to do is to say, we're going to be creating league tables for this. And by the way, in 3 months' time, we're going to publish them. And it gives them an opportunity to do something about it before you basically name and shame, which is essentially what you're doing, but you're doing it in a much, much more positive way. So, and it's not about who is the worst, it's about what support do you need to give them in order for them to improve. It's always best to try and swap it round the other way. You will find that organizations that are not interested will be at the bottom of the table. We all know who the worst salespeople are in terms of getting back to you for queries, and this will demonstrate it very clearly. And what we've also seen is organizations and salespeople, when they get to this point and they start to see this kind of thing, if they don't like being exposed, they will either change their behavior, and many of them actually leave the organization because they don't like being exposed for their failings. So think about that. League tables, and what else is stuff that pushes people's buttons? That's the killer. What is going to make people listen to you? One of the things that I did when I was in telecoms, we had a thing called previous period calls, which was something that nobody likes to have on their phone bill. And the other thing was revenue, that was what we call briefcase time. So a salesman would have the order form for a new customer literally in his briefcase. But the customer, they could activate their phone calls before the order got to the office, which meant that all these customers were making phone calls and they ended up sitting in suspense because there was no account set up to actually manage them. This suspense file was growing and growing and growing. The longer that salesman had this in his briefcase, the longer the suspense file would go. And I thought, this is crazy. And I was responsible for billing. I was responsible for from the point the phone call was made through to cash in the bank. So I couldn't figure out how do I get the salesman to send the damn forms in. And then so I thought, right. So we put a notional value against each call. And we didn't know what the value was. We just put a notional value. We just said 20 pence. Right. And then when we added up all of these call data records, the CDRs as they were called, we found that there was huge volumes of these calls, and it accounted for millions. And of course, the one thing that salesmen are always interested in is revenue. But of course, revenue wasn't being counted until the client account was open. So we started to publish each region and each salesperson how many calls they had in suspense for their particular customer, and it went through the roof. And it changed the behavior literally overnight. And that's the sort of thing that you've got to figure out. What is going to change the behavior? What presses people's buttons so they listen to you? And then once you've got their attention, you can then say, well, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. But as I said, once you start, you absolutely cannot stop doing this. You have to carry on doing it. There's no point in creating a league table once every year. You have to do it all the time to keep the numbers down. We know that as soon as you take your eye off the ball in credit, the debt does that. It's the same. So you have to carry on doing that. This is another example. I'll hand over to Pam on this one. And this, I do like this. This is very good. Go ahead, Pam.
Yeah. So this model, I don't know about you as a credit person, but I love a grid, and I love a something that I can get my hands on, as in understanding all my stakeholders. Chris mentioned on the previous slide that who are stakeholders in credit management? Everybody was the answer. But this one really hones it into who are more important than others. So this is a classic, it's called a stakeholder power matrix. You can find it all over the internet. It's something that people use in project management. So we've divided it into 4 quadrants, high power, high interest on the right-hand side. And these are your key players. And in your key players could be the salespeople, it could be sales director, you know, your high senior management as such. Next to that, you've got high power but low interest. And in there, we say you've got to keep these people satisfied and meet their needs. So they are going to be wanting to understand what you're trying to do. So especially if you're trying to implement something like CICMQ or any kind of change in working sort of remit that you might have to do, you are going to have certain people that have the power in the organization or outside of the organization, but are going to want to know what is it you're doing and how does it impact on them. So that grid, we start off high power, low interest, high power, high interest. If you look at the bottom 2 quadrants, low power, low interest. So these are the ones that you don't have to spend a great deal of time with. but they might need to have a general communication saying, this is what credit department are doing at the moment. So just to keep people in the loop as such. Right hand side, low power, high interest, keep informed, show consideration, try and make sure that they are involved in the low risk areas, and of course look upon them as being a potential supporter. So it's the interest of the stakeholder versus the influence and power of the stakeholder. And when I get teams to do this, I get them to do it at, we don't sort of talk about who it is. We don't want names on the grid. We just want functions. And it is quite interesting because credit departments sometimes, and we're always banging on about they shouldn't be the back office, but a lot of times people within the credit department do feel that they are the forgotten people. They don't feel that they have a voice. So when I get teams to do this, they suddenly realize, oh, actually, do you know what? We are quite important to the business, and it's really good to be able to see this. So that's an example that I do recommend for any kind of project work, etc.
Thanks, Pam. Now, it's the other thing that I find interesting about this. There will be individuals and people in your organisation that are just frankly not interested, and you can spend a significant amount of time trying to convert them to what you want them to be aware of. And if they're not interested, they're not interested. But if you've got a league table there, right, things like that, then they may not be interested at first, but trust me, when they start to get published and these things start to happen, you start to send out emails saying, what a fantastic job Region 5 did this month, because they not only topped the sales, but their debtors position was significantly lower than anybody else's. Thanks very much. Get a letter from the CEO, etc., etc. When they start seeing this sort of thing going on, success will breed success. They will want to be a part of it. So don't waste your time trying to convert what I call the suits. Don't try to convert them. They will come round, and you can waste an awful lot of time trying to convert them. So work with what one business guru once said, work with the raving fans, because those are the ones that are going to spread that view and that news across the organization. The suits, leave them. They will convert over time. Don't worry, they will come round. So this is a stakeholder plan from a client, and I've covered up the client name with the CICMQ logo. There might be some clues in there as to who they are. There might be a mention of one of their parent companies. I'm not sure. Yes, there is. But this is an example, and I use this because this shows that everybody is a stakeholder. Yeah, from treasury, management staff, credit agencies, tracing agencies, professional bodies, the divisions of the organization, the customers, the clients, everybody is a stakeholder. And this is a great example of this. And this was, in fact, if you look at it closely, you can see who it is. It's a company called Amy. Yeah, and they've got some really good stuff around stakeholders and things like that. And this is one of the slides that we shamelessly stole to show you. It's a particularly good one, and we use this one a lot with organisations that sort of say, well, how do we do a stakeholder map? Well, there you go, right? And it's a good one. It's a good one, that is. So this is an indication of the sorts of things as to where. In fact, if I do that, you can see there's Amy underneath it. So you can see that this organisation is very, very clear about who their stakeholders are. The two credit managers that they had at the time, they put this together, and it was a really good one, actually. We do like this one, and I use it when we do best practice sharing quite a bit. So you've got your stakeholder, your roadmap, you've got your stakeholders. You then need to think, right, what are the messages? When you're launching something, you've got to think about that. And there are different ways in which you can do it. This is a stakeholder management plan, actually, that I produced for a client in 2004, and it is still relevant today. And some of the ways in which you deliver it might be slightly different. The chalkboards and slate and things like that are out the window now. There's things called email. But what we've got here is what we have in terms of what you need, the purpose of the communication. Is it to coordinate? Is it to update, to kick off something, to educate them, to prepare them for something, to instruct them, to engage with them, to motivate them, or get their support? Yeah. And how are you going to get to it? You know, so this was a revenue assurance project for a client, a Dutch telecoms client, actually, when I was working in the Netherlands for a while. And so this gives you, this is the sort of thing. So if you look at preparing people for the impacts of their job, department, client X, generally in terms of the role, responsibilities, objectives, and timeframes. So this is to prepare them for something, right? Or to engage, communicates to get people involved in the program, gathering feedback, asking for suggestions, understanding requirements, etc. So this is the first part of the stakeholder management plan that I pulled together for them. And again, this might be old, but it's something that is a really, really basic thing you can have a look at and sort of see how it works. The second one, this is the second page of it. This looks at who the audience is, what the purpose of that communication is, the message that you're trying to send, how you're going to deliver it, how often you're going to deliver it, who's going to put the content together, and how you're going to, and who's responsible for delivering it. Because those people can always be the same. The manager of a function or the team member in a function might not actually understand how to put a PowerPoint presentation together, to be honest, but they're really good at delivering. Yeah, you should leave people and look at people for their skill sets and their strengths in this kind of thing. So this is an example. This is a top level. It goes down several levels. It starts off at the client board of directors, first line reports. It's got managers, staff, customers, and it just keeps going down, right? And then depending on what you're trying to get out of it. But this is quite a good example. This is just the first page, as I said. But the headings are the same regardless of who the stakeholder is. So this is the board of directors, right? So we're going to kick off something. Yeah, company-wide initiative driven by finance, revenue assurance steering committee. So that's the message. The vehicle is going to be presentation and kickoff meetings to each board member, and it's going to be done monthly at the monthly board meetings, and it's also face-to-face meetings with the CEO and his team. Right? That was how we described it. We're going to start in January, and then it's going to be monthly, and for the CEO, we're going to do it bi-monthly. So we're not going to do it every month to him. We're going to do it every other month, right? So this is about figuring out who your audience is and how often you should be talking to them. Responsible for the content was Ron. Right, a Dutch guy, a very Dutch surname. Ron and the revenue assurance team, they were going to put the content together, and then the responsibility for delivery was actually a guy called Robert, who at the time was the CFO. So Ron, who was the revenue assurance manager, put the stuff together, and the CFO delivered it to the board of directors. Right? And then Ron, obviously, Ron then delivered it actually to the CEO and his team as well. So then this gives you an idea of, coordinate. So that's the kickoff. These are updates, coordination, kickoffs, education, etc. And again, it depends on who you are talking to, what the message is you're trying to get across. But this, again, very, very simple way of doing it. And you can. This is the sort of thing. And this here, these two slides here are the sorts of things that you can give to your team to help them to understand the importance of stakeholders, and to start to developing these things themselves. Okay. So what does all of this mean? So we've spoken about what you need to put in your roadmap. Okay. We've spoken about some of the sorts of things that you can use as an aid memoir, the things that you might not think about when you're doing it. We've given some examples of the types of roadmap that you can use, the simplistic ones, and then the more detailed ones with the boxes underneath that outline each one. We said that everybody is a stakeholder, and once you start, you can't stop. You will create a monster with this, but you must carry on with it. The important thing is it creates awareness in the organization, and that's what we're looking for. Credit aware organizations, especially now. How do we make sure that we stay at the table? By doing this kind of stuff, you will absolutely make sure you stay aware. Once you've figured out who your stakeholders are, categorize them. Yeah. And as I said, everyone is a stakeholder. Think about what your plan is going to be. Think about the purpose and the definition of the different things that you're going to be talking about. And of course, the plan itself, how are we going to get that out to the business. You've got your plan, which is fantastic. It's linked to the vision and values of your organization. How we're then going to articulate that to the business in the most appropriate way. And this is something that you can use to do that. So this is about, once again, about taking leadership, taking the leadership role and taking control of what you're doing rather than having somebody else do it for you. By doing this stuff, you will instill trust in the organization, because they will believe that they will actually start to believe that you know what the hell you're doing. Right? And that's a very important thing in building trust. You've got to make sure that people understand you're very clear about what you're doing. You've got very, very clear objectives. You understand who you're messaging. You're engaging with the rest of the business. So simplicity of message and clear objectives is really important here. And as I said, don't wait to make the decisions, as we've said many times before. And it's a leadership through trust. If they trust you to do what you say you're going to do, and you deliver on these things that you're doing, you're linking it to the vision and values, you will get buy-in and you will get trust. And then this is the first step really into you starting to set your own objectives rather than your boss doing it for you, which is always the best way to do it. So that's it. We are 4 minutes left. If anybody has got any questions, comments or feedback, we'd really welcome them. Also, if you've got any comments or questions on what future Zoom calls, 11s calls that you want to run. Let me have a look, see if we've got any questions from here. Right. Okay. So has anybody got any? Who's got the first question, or anybody want to make any comments?
Which I was going to ask.
Not quite sure who he's talking to.
Sorry, go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was the most difficult part to implement of your enablers, etc.? What was the most difficult one?
So this is the shell one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's jump back in there. You should.
That's a really good question, because the enabler part was very interesting, and the differentiators trying to get those, well, differentiators. Yeah.
I mean, we all knew that we wanted to have a single process and system standardization. That was very difficult because all of the organizations that were in Shell at the time had their own systems, and because they were managed by different people in the business, it was difficult convincing them that actually one credit control team would be a good idea, because a lot of the businesses, so for example, there were 17 different reporting lines, as I said, and one of the issues that they had was that sometimes they reported to the country manager, right, who's quite high up in the organization. Sometimes they reported to the finance guy. Sometimes they reported to a division head, right? So that was all different. So first of all, we had to convince them that was the good idea, to have it all organized into one group. That took about 5 years to get the credit teams all doing that. Right? And Shell is a hideously complicated organization. I can't tell you how complicated it is. But the one set of rules, once we got everybody, although not everybody was reporting through the group, within 2 years we had like I guess you could call it a center of gravity, right? It became obvious that that's what was going to happen eventually. And then we started on the one set of rules. So we started to draft a set of rules before we had the organizational alignment in place. We're doing these things in parallel. But the difficulty, I think, was the different ways in which organizations measured themselves. Each credit manager, and there were a lot of them, had their own view. And that, as I said, that took a year to get a single consistent set of numbers that we could actually sort of say, right, and the DSO for Shell is this. Right?
So it was the consistent it was the consistent management information then, out of the enablers part. Would you say
that was the most difficult? Yeah, in terms of getting a single, if you like, process nailed down, because everybody had their own views. And the other thing was, there were a number of credit managers in Shell who had been there for like forever. And they'd been using those, you know, I've been using this day sales outstanding measurement for the last 30 years. It's never been a problem before, you know, and we got a lot of that, you know. But the great thing about Shell was it's one of those organizations that is so focused on performance, and it still is. You look at the numbers and stuff that they're doing now. It's an incredibly focused organisation, and they've changed. I mean, every time we do an assessment or something, they've changed. They do something. They do it slightly differently. They've got. They did have 1,200 people in credit then. They got 500 now, and it's all shared service centre. There's no country-based credit management at all now.
And was this the theme that Jacques Vinken had with the Dash for Cash? Was that similar?
Yeah, the Dash for Cash. That was EU Hunt for Cash.
EU Hunt for Cash.
Right? The EU Hunt for Cash was something that Jacques was responsible for Europe. He was also responsible for chemicals. They had like this double hatting in Shell. And when he took over the European credit role, he wanted to do something really different. And he contacted me because I'd done cash challenges before. And the Dash for Cash was designed, or the EU Hunt for Cash was designed to drive a single purpose, a common purpose, through the organisation in Europe. And what it did was for them, it was funny because we originally said that what we wanted to do was we wanted an outrageous target. We always pick this outrageous target, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna go for this target." And I said, "That's not enough." And they said, no, it's not enough. They ended up going for 100 million. They wanted to reduce their debtors position by 100 million in Europe. And I said, no, it should be 200 million. And then they took at the end of the first year, they did 170 million. Right? I said, I told you. But what they'd also done was they reduced their age debt dramatically. In some countries, it was zero. Right, over as the years carried on, it came down to zero. So that it was all part of this that happened in the same period, and it was all of these things were designed, like for example the slogan at the bottom there, one credit management adding value. That was a slogan that we put together for them, which tried to sort of in one small short sentence say this is what we're about. And it worked. It did work. It was extremely successful. I think overall, over the time that we were there, we took 2 billion off their working capital, and by the time Joris left, I think it was more like 4.5.
It's just so incredibly important to have that theme or that saying that everybody can latch into in the business. And I was reminded by it by the other night. I was watching a Gordon Ramsay to renovate an old pub, and he said, right, we're going to have the best, really good sausage and mash here. But he said, we are going to have the best gravy in the whole of the UK. And that's going to be your unique selling point. And everybody's going to come here just for the gravy. The sausage and mash will be all right, but the gravy. And everybody just said, oh, that pub that's got the best gravy. And it was the same with Jacques when he was doing the Dash for Cash.
True.
It was all across Europe.
Yeah, it was all across Europe. It was extremely successful.
It was worldwide, wasn't it? Asia as well.
Yes.
Yeah, it did go extremely well. Yeah, and I actually got Jack sent me a pair of cufflinks actually when it all finished with the logo.
Sorry, did you say handcuffs?
No, cufflinks.
Yes. He got the golden handcuffs.
yeah. But and as a result of that program, actually, the Jacques and the credit team in Europe, they won the Chief Execs Award, which is like, it's like rare as hen's teeth in Shell to get that. You can imagine one Chief Exec Award a year, and there's thousands of people, and him and his team won it. So it's a fantastic.
It's a fascinating presentation. I've seen him do it a couple of times at the ICTF over in Europe. It was brilliant. Yeah. Everybody had badges and mugs with the logos on and everything.
That's right. I've still got mine somewhere up there. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was really good. But that again is one of the cash challenges that we've done. And we've done. It was slightly different. But because it was over a year rather than a much shorter period, but yeah, it was a similar sort of thing, and that's on one of the that's one of the things that we've done. So we're running those cash challenges now completely remotely. So we're running them for clients now. We've got one coming up actually very shortly. So anybody else got any sort of questions or comments? I'm conscious of time. It's 12:04 now.
Yeah, just looking backwards, Chris, what's been the benefits, would you say, to the organisations that have gone for CICMQ over the years you, Pam and Sharon, have been managing it?
I think it's really been the awareness of credit within their organisation. That's something that organisations have have recognised that is that the organisations become credit aware, especially if you do the workshop approach and you do things like the cash challenge, and then when you get the award, the accreditation, or you know, we always say to them, you know, you've got to advertise this in the business, you know, to sort of demonstrate that you are best practice. Because most credit managers, you know, they do tend to sort of not shout about how brilliant they are, and so when they do that, I mean, it's good. So credit awareness is probably one of the key things. And also, what we found, we've had some feedback from a number of clients actually who have said that having the discipline of the CICMQ process has helped them become more resilient as part of this whole pandemic thing, because they know these are the processes and procedures that they follow. These are the rules that we have to follow, and these rules are not going to be broken, you know, just because we're working from home. These are the things that we work to. So they have kept up those standards, and we've done a number of midterms and things like that. And this is the sorts of things that they're saying, that, you know, it has made us more resilient because we have our stuff documented. We are doing our stakeholder management. We know what our plans are. Our people are trained, you know, and they are much more motivated and engaged than they were before. And that's something that we're very proud of, is that people actually take that. I mean, Sharon, what do you? I mean, you're still on. What's your view? What do you think?
I was just hoping to jump in here, really, because for me, I used to wear two hats, didn't I? I applied for the accreditation way back in 2010, and we were successfully accredited for the next 4 years. Was it 4 years or more? I can't remember. I know
it's a long time.
8 years. And then we achieved Centre of Excellence, didn't we, before I left Amia Foods. But for me, it was just everything. It was all about continuous improvement. I grew so much. And as you've just said then, Chris, you know, every 2 years when we had to renew, you do it ongoing, but I made sure that everything was just exact for you or the assessor at the time coming along to make sure that I had all my house in order. But it was the networking, it was just the growth, continuous improvement, the credit awareness, the, you know, realization that we were a very important part in the business, you know, and we were making a difference. So, I mean, I could talk passionately about it all day, but yeah, it kind of changed my life, really.
Yeah. I mean, you did it yourself, Matthew. You did.
Yes.
You did the workshop approach at Amy when you were there.
Yes, and we, like you said, it particularly reverberated around the organisation, the awareness, and as you've gone through this morning, it's quite illuminating to see how many people were totally unaware of credit, and actually credit management went on in the business at all. I think they just thought bills were paid. But particularly the interlinking and the stakeholders, that everyone's a stakeholder. And by sharing best practice and KPIs and making sure people got the relevant information regularly, it was really positive to see how that it changed behaviour as well, and also changed our behaviour in the credit team, that we did things differently as well. I think I remember being told by you, certainly I'd never considered about credit teams. We look for charts to go down. We look at age debt. We want the chart to go down. And of course, I'd never conceived until you'd said that and perceived that sales teams see that as a bad thing. They want a chart to go up to show their sales are increasing. And they said, you said, why don't you flip your chart round so that it's going up instead? And that had positive effects as well. So just simple little tips like that. So
yeah.
Okay. And anybody else got anything? Any other questions?
Sorry, Chris, can I
Yeah,
ask a quick question? The model you have, is it bespoke to industries and or location, especially overseas?
What model are you talking about?
You know, the assessment models you have. I mean, you know, certain markets, certain industries have a different benchmark.
They do,
different processes.
There isn't it is a generic model, right? When you look at the criteria are the starting point, what we look for is when we go to an organization, and in some cases, you know, we look at an organization, we think, well, if we're going to go to, I don't know, EDF Energy or Npower or Gazprom, or we would expect to see certain things. We would expect to see the way in which they do things in a certain way. If we went to a double glazing company in Rickmansworth, right, and we did CICMQ there with 3 credit controllers or 2 credit controllers, we would expect to see something completely different. Yeah, and it's not, you can't, when you're looking at best practice, you know, everybody has their own view about what best practice is. If somebody said to me, "What is the best practice credit policy?" I can't tell you that, you know, and if I can tell you what should be in it, and we've got the CICMQ credit policy white paper, right? However, you know, if you look at that credit policy white paper and you apply it to your business, it will be different. You know, some people, oh, send me an example of a credit policy. Well, no, because your organisation is different from everybody else's, you know, and that's the lazy way, frankly. You know, you've got to look at your business and say what is appropriate. And in the same way that we do when we do these assessments, we don't tailor it. There are some elements that we have tailored in this last 6 months or so. So we look at organisations that have shared service centre activities slightly differently. We look at organisations that are providing a service to credit management slightly differently. So if a debt collection agent, for example, is looking at becoming CICMQ, we would require not only their commercial offering to be assessed, but also we would also require their internal collections to be assessed as well. You can't have brilliance in one and be rubbish at the other. You know, this is best practice generally. And we would also ask, if we're doing a third party, well, what do your customers think? So we ask them for a list of their 10 customers, and we pick 5 and we just phone them up and say, so how do you work with these guys? What are they like? You know, and how often do you get your money from them? Is it paid direct to you? How quick do they refer debts to you? And how quick do you get a response from them when you've got an issue, or when you try and, you know, so we do sort of tailoring to an element of it. But basically, you know, if you're good at credit management, you're good at credit management. Yeah, but I can't tell you what is best practice for an organisation, because it is different. And I don't like. We can benchmark. I do like to benchmark processes. You know, the way that organisations process credit. But what I don't like to benchmark are the numbers. You know, if you've got our DSO is 35, so therefore we're much better than you because yours is 54. That's nonsense. Yeah? And so, I always think that organisations that do that, and some of them are, you know, quite well-known benchmarking organisations. How can you do that? I wrote an article about it, and it's on my LinkedIn page. You know, how can you measure yourself with someone else's tape measure? You can't. You know, so why do you compare your DSO with somebody else's, even if you're in the same industry? Because they've got different processes, people, capabilities, products. You know, environments, training, it's all completely different. How can you sort of say, well, I'm 54, therefore I'm brilliant, you're 75, therefore you're rubbish? It doesn't mean anything. So organisations should look to themselves and look more inwardly, I think, when they're looking at benchmarking. I disagree with the benchmarks. I think, and I asked a guy who was a partner in one of the big 5 accounting firms, who did a lot of benchmarking. And I said, so how do you do your benchmarking then? And he just retired. He said, well, to be honest, he said, we look at a couple of our customers and then we take a bit of a guess. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is benchmarking. So I don't, you know, and if they're charging you, you know, oh, come join us, our benchmark, it's £20,000, right? You know, not convinced.
It reminds me of the saying that it's proven that 97.35% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you what the general rough sort of, but I can't. You know, you should never try and compare yourself in that way with another.
It was just about when the question was more about bespoke. So, you know, if you go into a certain industry, would you have to look at it differently to another industry?
Yeah, we do.
Which is great, because I think it then fits the industry, and it fits the company a lot better
But that's down to the experience, to be
Yeah,
honest. That's down to
absolutely.
the experience of the assessors doing the work. And I'm very, very pleased that we've got Pam and Sharon that do this work, because they're very experienced credit managers. And it's down to their experience. And when you look at the broad breadth of organisations that have CICMQ, you can see, you know, there's some with 2 people in credit, like Fanuc, and another company that's got, you know, a couple of hundred. And some organisation, we're working with an organisation right now, they don't have a credit policy. I'm not saying they're bad, they just don't have one.
Yeah.
You know, because it's all built into their systems.
Yeah.
Those are very different organisations.
When I was working with Atoll at French Connection, he asked to borrow my tape measure to measure his DSO.
Yeah, and
No, I think I should.
yeah, and
I think I
it's
should
broken
stop
as well.
sharing and possibly stop recording as well.
I was going to say you're still recording.
Yes. So, yeah, I'm just going to stop recording now. So thanks very much, everybody, for joining, and I hope you found it useful.